The shadow of Eleanor Bennett's fist hung over the horizon as Bethany Blackwell watched the sunset from the porch of her father's ranch house. Blood seeped from the corner of her lip, a crimson line trailing down her chin to stain her once pristine white blouse. This wasn't the first time, and deep down she knew it wouldn't be the last, not as long as she remained under his roof in La Junta, Colorado Territory, 1876. Beth. Her father's voice thundered from inside, the familiar slur indicating he'd been at the whiskey again. "Get in here, girl." Bethany's hands trembled as she wiped away the blood. At 22, she'd endured her father's rage for as long as she could remember, especially since her mother's passing 5 years ago. Eleanor Bennett had been the buffer between Bethany and her father's unpredictable temper. Without her, the ranch had become Bethany's prison, her father its merciless warden. "Coming, father," she called, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. Inside, the lamp cast eerie shadows across the weathered face of Jeremiah Blackwell. Once a respected rancher, years of drinking and bitterness had twisted him into something unrecognizable. His eyes, bloodshot and narrowed, followed her as she entered. "Supper's not ready," he growled, rising from his chair. "What good are you if you can't even get a meal on the table?" "I'm sorry," Bethany said, backing toward the kitchen. "I lost track of time. I'll have it ready." The blow came without warning, his open hand connecting with her cheek with enough force to send her sprawling across the rough wooden floor. Pain blossomed across her face, but she didn't cry out. Experience had taught her that tears only fueled his rage. "Useless," he spat. "Just like your mother." Bethany pushed herself up, tasting blood again. "Mother was never useless," she whispered, instantly regretting the words. Jeremiah's face darkened. "What did you say to me?" Before he could reach her again, a pounding at the door interrupted. Jeremiah cursed, shooting her a warning look before stalking to answer it. Sheriff Daly stood on the porch, hat in hand. "Evening, Blackwell. Got word there's trouble at your place again." Bethany's heart sank. The neighbors must have heard the shouting, but like every other time, nothing would change. La Junta might be growing, but out here on the outskirts, a man's home was still his castle, and what happened behind closed doors stayed there. "No trouble," Jeremiah said smoothly. "Just having a discussion with my daughter about her responsibilities." Sheriff Daly's eyes found Bethany, noting the redness on her cheek and the blood on her lip. "That right, Miss Bethany." She tried telling the truth once before. The beating that followed had left her bedridden for days. "Yes, sir," she murmured, eyes downcast. "Everything's fine." The sheriff hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "All right then, just keeping the peace." After he left, Jeremiah turned to her, fury barely contained. "Get to bed, no supper for you tonight." Bethany retreated to her small room, locking the door behind her. It wouldn't keep him out if he truly wanted in, but tonight she sensed he'd return to his bottle instead. Sinking onto her bed, she pulled out the small tin box hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside lay $37.12, her escape fund, painstakingly saved from selling eggs and occasionally mending clothes for neighbors when her father was away. "Just a little more," she whispered to herself, calculating how much she'd need to make it to Denver. There, she had heard, a woman could find respectable work and a life away from the shadow of men like her father. As she tucked the box away, Bethany caught her reflection in the small mirror hanging on the wall. A woman with haunted eyes stared back, her once vibrant face now perpetually guarded. She hardly recognized herself anymore. "Tomorrow," she promised her reflection. "Tomorrow I'll find a way to add to the box." Little did she know that tomorrow would bring a stranger to La Junta, a man whose arrival would change everything. Dawn broke clear and cool over the eastern plains of Colorado, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Bethany rose early, as was her habit, to begin her chores before her father awakened from his drunken slumber. The bruise on her cheek had darkened overnight, a purple-blue stain she tried to hide by arranging her auburn hair to fall forward. The chickens clucked contentedly as she gathered eggs, tucking them carefully into her apron. 6 eggs would go to the breakfast table, but she'd secreted away 2 that she could sell to Mrs. Peterson at the general store later. It wasn't much, but every penny counted toward her freedom. "You planning on running, girl?" Bethany nearly dropped the eggs at the sound of her father's voice. She hadn't heard him approach the chicken coop, a rare mistake on her part. "Just gathering breakfast," she answered, keeping her tone neutral. Jeremiah Blackwell studied her, his bloodshot eyes surprisingly lucid this morning. "Got a letter yesterday. Your cousin Martha's taken ill in Pueblo. I'm riding out to see her today." Relief washed over Bethany, though she was careful not to show it. A reprieve, however brief, was a blessing she hadn't expected. "How long will you be gone?" she asked, measuring her words carefully to hide her eagerness. 3 days, maybe 4. He narrowed his eyes. "Don't get any ideas. Reverend Powell will be checking in, and so will Sheriff Daly. You try to leave, they'll bring you right back." "Yes, Father." The words tasted bitter, but she forced them out, knowing that argument would only delay his departure. An hour later, she watched from the porch as Jeremiah rode away, the dust from his horse's hooves hanging in the air like a veil. Only when he disappeared over the horizon did she allow herself a full, deep breath, the first in what felt like forever. With her father gone, Bethany moved quickly. She retrieved her savings box and counted the money again, running her fingers over each precious coin. Not enough yet, but if she could sell more eggs and perhaps some of the preserves she'd put up last summer, she might get closer to her goal. She was so absorbed in her calculations that she almost missed the approaching rider. By the time she noticed, he was nearly at the gate, a stranger on a dappled gray horse. Hastily, she tucked the money away and smoothed her dress, suddenly conscious of her appearance. The man dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. Tall, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin, he removed his hat as he approached, revealing hair the color of wheat in late summer. Bethany estimated him to be in his late 20s, his face weathered but handsome, with lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he smiled more often than not. "Madam," he called, keeping a respectful distance from the porch. "Sorry to intrude, name's Yates Xavier." "I'm looking for Jeremiah Blackwell." Bethany hesitated, years of caution making her wary of strangers, especially men. "My father's not here. He's gone to Pueblo and won't be back for several days." The stranger Yates frowned slightly. "That's unfortunate. I've come about the horses." He put word out in Denver that he was looking to sell some stock. She vaguely recalled her father mentioning something about selling horses to raise cash, though she hadn't paid much attention. Jeremiah's business affairs seldom concerned her unless they affected his drinking. "I don't know anything about that," she said, remaining on the porch, one hand on the door in case she needed to retreat quickly. Yates nodded, his eyes flickering briefly to the bruise on her cheek before politely shifting away. "I've come a long way. Would you mind if I watered my horse before heading back to town?" It was a reasonable request, one she couldn't refuse without appearing inhospitable. "The well's around back," she said, pointing. "Help yourself." As he led his horse away, Bethany debated what to do. Proper etiquette demanded she offer a traveler refreshment, but inviting a strange man into the house when she was alone went against everything her instincts told her. By the time Yates returned from watering his horse, she'd compromised by bringing a glass of water and a piece of cornbread out to the porch. "Thank you kindly," he said, accepting both with a genuine smile that momentarily disarmed her. "You've got a fine place here." "It was," Bethany replied before she could stop herself. "Once." Yates took a sip of water, his eyes taking in the neglected state of the ranch, the sagging fence, the overgrown garden, the weathered paint on the house. "Hard to keep up a spread this size alone," he observed. "My father manages," she said stiffly. His eyes met hers, and for an uncomfortable moment, Bethany felt as though he could see through the careful facade she'd constructed. "And you, do you manage as well, Miss Blackwell, Bethany Blackwell?" She took a step back. "I manage fine, Mr. Xavier. Thank you for your concern." He finished the water and handed back the empty glass, careful not to let their fingers touch. "I'll be staying in La Junta for a few days. If your father returns early, would you let him know I'm at the Colorado House Hotel?" "I will," she promised, already counting the minutes until his departure. Yates settled his hat back on his head, tipping it slightly. "Miss Blackwell," he said, his voice gentler than before, "if you need anything while your father's away, the hotel's not far." Before she could respond, he was back on his horse, riding away as quietly as he'd come. Bethany watched until he was out of sight, surprised to find her heart beating faster than usual. That evening, as she prepared a simple supper for herself, Bethany couldn't stop thinking about Yates Xavier. There had been something in his eyes, not pity, which she despised, but a kind of understanding that unsettled her. As if he'd recognized a fellow survivor, she ate alone on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. With her father gone, the ranch was peaceful, the silence broken only by the occasional lowing of cattle or the distant call of a night bird. For the first time in years, Bethany allowed herself to imagine a different life. Not just escape, but something more, a life where she might wake without dread, speak without fear, perhaps even love without the shadow of her father's fists hanging over her. But such thoughts were dangerous, leading to hopes that would only be crushed. Tomorrow, she reminded herself, she would go into town to sell her eggs and perhaps inquire discreetly about passage to Denver. For now, though, she would savor this rare moment of peace and try not to wonder about the man with the wheat-colored hair and the kind eyes. Morning brought a change in the weather, with dark clouds gathering to the west and a damp chill in the air that spoke of coming rain. Bethany hurried through her chores, determined to reach town before the storm broke. She dressed carefully in her best gingham dress, hoping to appear respectable but not attract undue attention. La Junta had grown considerably in the 3 years since the railroad had come through, transforming from a sleepy outpost to a bustling small town. The main street now boasted a hotel, a bank, 2 saloons, and several shops in addition to the general store that had been there for years. Bethany kept her head down as she made her way to Peterson's general store, acutely aware of the bruise on her face despite her attempts to hide it with her bonnet. Inside, the familiar scent of coffee, leather, and dried goods greeted her. "Morning, Bethany, Mrs." Peterson called from behind the counter. The older woman's kind eyes lingered on Bethany's face, but she had the grace not to comment. "What brings you to town today?" "I've brought eggs," Bethany replied, placing the small basket on the counter, "and some of last summer's blackberry preserves." Mrs. Peterson examined the offerings. "Lovely as always, I can give you 50 cents for the lot." It was a fair price, perhaps even generous, and Bethany nodded gratefully. As Mrs. Peterson counted out the coins, the bell above the door jingled, announcing another customer. Bethany glanced up and froze. Yates Xavier stood in the doorway, shaking water from his hat. Outside, the rain had begun to fall in earnest. "Mr. Xavier," Mrs. Peterson greeted him, "back again so soon." "Needed some tobacco," he replied, his eyes meeting Bethany's briefly before he politely looked away. "And it seems I timed it poorly with the weather," Mrs. Peterson chuckled. "It'll pass quick enough. Spring storms always do." Bethany pocketed her money and gathered her empty basket, suddenly eager to leave despite the rain. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I should be getting back." "In this downpour," the shopkeeper exclaimed, "you'll be soaked through before you're halfway home. Better wait it out." "I don't mind the rain," Bethany insisted. "Actually, Miss Blackwell," Yates interrupted, "I was hoping to speak with you about your father's horses. Since I'm here and can't do much else until the rain lets up, perhaps we could discuss the matter." Mrs. Peterson beamed. "What a fine idea. You two can use the back room. I just got a fresh pot of coffee on." Before Bethany could protest, she found herself ushered into the small room behind the shop where Mrs. Peterson sometimes took her midday meal. Yates followed, maintaining a respectful distance that did little to ease Bethany's discomfort. "I apologize for the ambush," he said once they were seated at the small table, a cup of coffee steaming before each of them. "But I wanted to speak with you privately." Alarm flashed through Bethany. "Mr. Xavier, if you think—" "No," he interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "Nothing improper, I assure you. It's about your situation." Her guard immediately rose. "My situation is none of your business." "Perhaps not," he conceded, "but I recognized the signs yesterday. The bruise, the way you flinched when I moved too quickly, how you kept the door within reach." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "My mother wore those same signs for 15 years. Bethany's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken so directly about her father's treatment. It was always veiled references, averted gazes, the collective silence of a community that chose not to see. I don't know what you're talking about, she said automatically, the denial a reflex honed by years of practice. Yates didn't press. Fair enough. But I want you to know that I'm staying in La Junta for a week, maybe two, not just for the horses. He slid a piece of paper across the table. This is my room at the hotel. If you need help, any kind of help, you can find me there. Bethany stared at the paper, not touching it. Why would you help a stranger? Because no one helped my mother, he replied simply. And she died with bruises like yours. The bluntness of his words struck Bethany like a physical blow. No one had ever acknowledged her reality so plainly without judgment or pity. It left her speechless. Outside, the rain continued to fall, drumming against the roof and windows in a soothing rhythm. In the warm, dry back room of the general store, Bethany found herself at a crossroads. She could continue as she always had, denying her reality to others and herself, or she could acknowledge the truth to this stranger who seemed to understand without explanation. My father will be home in 2 days, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. When he drinks, he gets. Angry? Yates nodded, his expression unchanged, neither pushing for more nor offering empty sympathy. And you've been planning to leave, he said. It wasn't a question. Bethany's eyes widened. How did you were counting money when I arrived yesterday, he said. And there was a determination in your eyes that I recognize. How much do you need? She hesitated, then decided that honesty was worth the risk. Another $20 would get me to Denver with enough to rent a room until I find work. Yates considered this. I have a proposition for you, Miss Blackwell. Not charity, he added quickly, seeing the resistance in her expression. Work. I am actually interested in your father's horses, but I need someone who knows them to help me evaluate the stock. I'll pay you $15 for your expertise over the next 2 days. It was a generous offer, suspiciously so. The horses aren't worth special attention, Bethany said cautiously, and I'm no expert. You've lived with them your whole life, Yates countered. You know more than you think. And I'm particular about the horses I buy. I breed them on my ranch north of Denver. The mention of Denver sent a jolt through her. You have a ranch near Denver, about a day's ride north, he confirmed. Small but growing, I come down to this region several times a year looking for good stock. Bethany weighed her options. If this was a genuine offer, it would bring her within reach of her goal. If it was some kind of trick, well, her life was already a series of calculated risks. I can show you the horses tomorrow, she decided, but I want payment after we're done, not before. Yates smiled, respect evident in his eyes. Fair terms. I'll come by mid-morning if that suits, she nodded, and as the rain began to ease, they finished their coffee in a silence that was, surprisingly, not uncomfortable. When they emerged from the back room, Mrs. Peterson gave them a knowing look that Bethany chose to ignore. Outside, puddles dotted the muddy street, reflecting the gray sky above. Bethany pulled her shawl tighter against the cool, damp air. May I walk you home, Miss Blackwell? Yates offered. The roads will be slick. That won't be necessary, she replied. But thank you for the offer, Mr. Xavier. He accepted her refusal with a nod. Until tomorrow, then. As Bethany made her way home, her mind raced with possibilities. If she accepted Yates's payment, she would have nearly enough for her journey. She could leave before her father returned, head to Denver, and start fresh. But a small voice in her head warned caution. Men like her father had taught her that kindness often came with hidden costs. What did Yates Xavier really want from her? By the time she reached the ranch, the clouds had begun to break, allowing shafts of sunlight to pierce through. Bethany stood on the porch, looking out over the land that had been both home and prison for her entire life. Tomorrow, she decided, she would show Yates the horses. If his offer was genuine, she would take his money and make her plans. If not, well, she had survived this long. She would find another way. That night, Bethany dreamed of open roads and distant cities, of a life where bruises came from accidents, not anger. And somewhere in those dreams, a man with wheat-colored hair and kind eyes appeared, offering a hand she wasn't yet brave enough to take. The next morning dawned clear and warm, the previous day's rain having washed the world clean. Bethany rose with the sun, her nerves making sleep impossible. She dressed with care in her practical work, clothes a simple brown skirt and a faded blue blouse that had once been her mother's. By the time she heard the approach of a horse, she had already prepared a light meal: biscuits, preserves, and coffee, partly out of hospitality and partly to settle her own churning stomach. Yates arrived exactly when he'd promised, dismounting with that same fluid grace she'd noticed before. Today he wore a blue shirt that matched his eyes, with a black vest and the same well-worn hat. "Good morning, Miss Blackwell," he called, leading his horse toward the house. "Mr. Xavier," she acknowledged. "I've prepared some refreshment before we look at the horses, if you'd care to join me." His smile was genuine. "That's mighty kind of you." Inside, Bethany was acutely aware of how Yates filled the small kitchen with his presence, not in the threatening way her father did, but with a quiet strength that somehow made the room feel safer rather than smaller. "Your father raises quarter horses?" he asked as they ate. Bethany nodded. "He started the herd about 10 years ago. We had more once, but he's sold off several since." She trailed off, unwilling to mention her mother's death and the subsequent decline. "Since times got hard," Yates supplied diplomatically. "It happens to many ranchers. That's why I'm interested in good bloodlines. They're getting harder to find." The conversation flowed more easily than Bethany had expected as they finished their meal. Yates spoke of his own ranch, of the challenges of building something from nothing, and of his hopes for the future. His passion was evident, and despite her caution, Bethany found herself drawn to his enthusiasm. After they'd eaten, she led him to the corral where the remaining horses grazed, 8 in total, a mix of mares, geldings, and 1 stallion. "That's Thunder," she said, pointing to the powerful black stallion watching them warily from across the corral. "He's the pride of the herd." Father would never sell him. Yates studied the animal with an expert eye. "Fine conformation, strong chest, good hindquarters. How's his temperament?" "Spirited but not mean," Bethany replied, surprised at how naturally the assessment came. "He responds well to a firm hand and consistent training." For the next hour, they moved from horse to horse, with Bethany detailing each animal's strengths, quirks, and lineage. Yates listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that revealed his own considerable knowledge. "You know horses well," he commented as they examined a chestnut mare. "Better than most men I've dealt with. My mother loved them," Bethany explained, running a gentle hand along the mare's neck. "She taught me everything before she passed. Father—" She hesitated, then decided on honesty. Father was more interested in cattle. "The horses were her project, then mine." Yates nodded thoughtfully. "I'd be interested in 3 of them: the bay gelding, the sorrel mare, and the young palomino. Would your father consider $15 a head?" "That's more than fair," Bethany said, surprised, "though I can't speak for him." "I understand." Yates leaned against the corral fence. "But I'd like to pay you for your time today, as we agreed." From his vest pocket, he produced 3 $5 gold pieces, offering them in an open palm. $15, as promised. Bethany stared at the money, hesitating. "It feels wrong, taking payment for something so simple." "You provided a valuable service," Yates insisted. "Your knowledge saved me time and potentially a poor investment. That's worth compensating." Slowly, she accepted the coins, their weight substantial in her palm. With this money, combined with her savings, she would have enough, more than enough, to make her way to Denver and establish herself. "Thank you," she said quietly. "When does your father return?" Yates asked, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. "Tomorrow, likely by nightfall." The thought sent a familiar dread through her. Yates studied her face. "And what will you do, Bethany Blackwell?" The use of her full name, spoken without judgment or expectation, caught her off guard. For a moment, she considered confiding in him, sharing her plan to leave before her father's return. Before she could respond, the sound of an approaching wagon interrupted them. Bethany's heart sank as she recognized Sheriff Daly's buggy coming up the drive. "Miss Bethany," the sheriff called as he approached, his eyes moving suspiciously between her and Yates. "Everything all right here?" "Yes, Sheriff," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mr. Xavier is interested in purchasing some horses." Sheriff Daly nodded, his expression relaxing slightly. "Your father asked me to check in while he was away, making sure you're not having any visitors." The implication was clear, and Bethany felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Xavier is a legitimate businessman, Sheriff." You can inquire at the Colorado House Hotel if you have concerns." "No need for that," Daly said, though his eyes lingered on Yates. "Your father's quite protective of you, Miss Bethany, just doing as he asked." "I understand," she said, though the words tasted bitter. Her father's protection had nothing to do with her welfare and everything to do with control. After a few more pointed questions, which Yates answered with easy confidence, the sheriff seemed satisfied. "I'll let your father know you had a business caller when he returns," he said as he prepared to leave. "Good day to you both." As the buggy disappeared down the drive, Bethany released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I'm sorry about that. No need to apologize," Yates assured her. "Though it does make me wonder how closely your father monitors your movements." The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. If Bethany left, would her father send men searching? Would the sheriff cooperate in bringing her back? "Too closely," she finally admitted. Yates nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Miss Blackwell, I've made my intentions clear about being willing to help if needed. That offer stands, regardless of your decision about the horses." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, but Bethany had learned the hard way not to trust too easily. "Why do you care what happens to me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "I recognize a good soul when I see one, and I know what it's like to feel trapped." His words touched something deep within her, a place so carefully guarded that she'd almost forgotten it existed. For a moment, Bethany allowed herself to imagine trusting this man, accepting his help, perhaps even. No, she cut the thought short. Her plan had always been to rely on herself to make her own escape. Adding another person, especially a man, would only complicate matters. "I appreciate your concern," she said, her voice cooler than she intended. "But I can manage my own affairs." If Yates was offended by her abrupt change in tone, he didn't show it. "Of course, I never suggested otherwise." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card, offering it to her. "My ranch address, should you decide to contact me about the horses, or anything else." Bethany accepted the card, tucking it into her pocket without looking at it. "I'll inform my father of your interest when he returns. Thank you for your time today, Miss Blackwell." Yates settled his hat more firmly on his head, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. "You've been more helpful than you know." As he mounted his horse and rode away, Bethany remained by the corral, the $15 heavy in her pocket and a decision equally heavy on her mind. The sheriff's visit had served as a stark reminder of the obstacles she faced. Even if she left, how far would she get before her father sent someone after her? And yet, the alternative staying was becoming increasingly unbearable. Inside the house, Bethany retrieved her tin box and added the gold pieces to her savings. $46.72. More than enough for a train ticket to Denver and a few weeks' lodging until she found work. From her dresser drawer, she took out the small portrait of her mother, the only personal possession she intended to take. Eleanor Bennett's gentle eyes seemed to watch her, neither encouraging nor discouraging, simply present. "What would you do, Mother?" Bethany whispered. But the portrait remained silent, and the decision remained hers alone. That night, as she prepared for bed, Bethany took out Yates's card and finally examined it. "Yates Xavier, North Star Ranch, Clear Creek, Colorado," it read in simple, elegant script. Below was a crude map showing the ranch's location north of Denver. She traced the lettering with her fingertip, wondering what kind of man so readily offered help to a stranger. In her experience, men like her father were far more common than men like Yates Xavier appeared to be. But appearances could be deceiving. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Tucking the card away with her money, Bethany made her decision. Tomorrow, before her father returned, she would leave La Junta behind, alone. Sleep came fitfully that night, dreams of pursuit and capture mingling with visions of freedom. By dawn, Bethany was already awake, methodically preparing for her departure. She packed sparingly a change of clothes, her mother's portrait, a loaf of bread, and some cheese for the journey. The money she divided, placing most in a hidden pocket sewn into her petticoat, with a small amount in her handbag for immediate expenses. The morning passed in a blur of routine chores and silent goodbyes. She fed the chickens one last time, patted each horse as she made her rounds, and even stood for a moment in her father's room, trying to reconcile the man he had become with the father she dimly remembered from childhood, a stern, but not yet violent man who had occasionally smiled at her mother's jokes and lifted Bethany onto his shoulders. By mid-morning she was ready. Dressed in her second-best dress with a shawl against the early spring chill, Bethany stood on the porch, surveying the ranch one final time. "Goodbye," she whispered to the house, to the mountains in the distance, to the life she had known. Then, gathering her small bag, she set out on foot toward La Junta. The walk into town would take nearly an hour, giving her plenty of time to catch the midday train to Denver. Her plan was simple: purchase her ticket, board the train, and never look back. What she hadn't planned for was the commotion evident as soon as she approached the outskirts of town. People were gathered in clusters, talking animatedly, and several horses were tied outside the saloon despite the early hour. Bethany kept her head down, moving quickly toward the station, but a familiar voice called her name before she could reach it. "Miss Blackwell, thank goodness." Mrs. Peterson hurried toward her, face flushed with concern. "Have you heard? There's been an accident on the Pueblo Road." Bethany's heart stuttered. What kind of accident? A wagon overturned at Miller's Creek Crossing. 2 men were badly injured. Mrs. Peterson clutched her arm. "They're saying one of them is your father." The ground seemed to shift beneath Bethany's feet. Her carefully constructed plan crumbled in an instant, replaced by a swirl of confused emotions: concern, fear, and a shameful flicker of hope that perhaps. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Dr. Wilson's office. They brought both men in about an hour ago." Without conscious decision, Bethany found herself heading toward the doctor's house at the edge of town, her escape plan temporarily forgotten. Whatever her feelings toward her father, she couldn't simply leave without knowing his condition. Dr. Wilson's front parlor had been converted into a waiting area where several townspeople sat or stood in somber conversation. They fell silent as Bethany entered, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. "Miss Blackwell," Dr. Wilson emerged from a back room, wiping his hands on a towel. "I'm glad you're here. Your father's been asking for you." "How bad is it?" she asked, steeling herself. "Multiple fractures, internal bleeding." The wagon rolled several times down the embankment. The doctor's expression was grave. "I've done what I can, but—" He let the sentence hang unfinished. Bethany nodded, understanding the implication. "May I see him?" Dr. Wilson led her to a small room where Jeremiah Blackwell lay on a narrow bed, his body broken and bandaged. The sight of him, pale, vulnerable, stripped of his usual intimidating presence, sent a confusing surge of emotions through Bethany. "Beth," he rasped as she approached, his voice barely audible. "Father," she responded, standing at his bedside, uncertain whether to take his hand. His eyes, clouded with pain, fixed on her face. "You were leaving," he said, surprising her with his perception. "Saw your bag through the window." Bethany didn't deny it. "Yes." A ghost of his familiar anger flickered across his face, quickly replaced by something else: resignation, perhaps, or possibly regret. "Can't blame you," he murmured. "Been a poor excuse for a father." The admission, so unexpected, left Bethany speechless. In all her years, she had never heard her father acknowledge any wrongdoing, let alone express what sounded almost like remorse. "Since your mother died." He coughed, a wet, worrying sound. "Lost my way, took it out on you, wasn't right." "No," Bethany agreed quietly, "it wasn't." Jeremiah's breathing grew more labored, each word seeming to cost him considerable effort. "The ranch, it's yours now, do what you want with it." "Father, you're not dying," he interrupted with a flicker of his old authority. "Not a fool, Beth, know when I'm done." His hand, gnarled and weakened, reached for hers. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. "Forgiveness, don't deserve it," but needed to say. Whatever else he intended to say was lost as a spasm of pain contorted his features. "Doctor." Wilson moved quickly to administer morphine, easing Jeremiah back into unconsciousness. "He likely won't wake again," the doctor said softly. "The internal damage is too severe. Hours at most." Bethany nodded, a strange numbness spreading through her. All her life she had feared this man, hated him at times, planned desperately to escape him. Now, watching him slip away, she felt neither relief nor sorrow, only a profound emptiness. "I'll stay," she said, settling into the chair beside the bed. The hours that followed passed in a surreal blur. Townspeople came and went, offering condolences and support. Sheriff Daly appeared to explain that the accident had occurred when Jeremiah's wagon wheel broke on the steep descent to Miller's Creek, sending both him and his traveling companion, a cattle buyer from Pueblo, tumbling down the rocky slope. Through it all, Bethany sat vigil, watching her father's labored breathing grow increasingly shallow until, as the sun began to set, it stopped altogether. "He's gone," Dr. Wilson confirmed gently. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Blackwell." The words sounded hollow, disconnected from the complex reality of her feelings. She had lost her father years ago when grief and alcohol had transformed him from the man who had once loved her mother into the monster who had made her life a nightmare. What she felt now, standing beside his body, was not grief but a strange, disorienting freedom. The life she had planned to escape was suddenly, irrevocably altered. The ranch was hers. Her future, uncertain but unbounded, stretched before her. As she stepped outside into the gathering dusk, Bethany realized that her bag, the one containing her few possessions and some of her money, had been left at Dr. Wilson's entrance in the chaos of the day. Retrieving it, she stood on the doctor's porch, suddenly unsure of her next move. The train to Denver was long gone. The home she had planned to flee was now hers for better or worse, and the father whose fists had driven her to desperation was beyond the reach of both her fear and her forgiveness. Miss Blackwell. She turned to find Yates Xavier standing at the bottom of the steps, hat in hand, his expression somber. "I heard about your father," he said. "I came as soon as I could." The sight of him solid, steady, unexpectedly present in this moment of upheaval broke through the numbness that had sustained Bethany through the day. Tears, long suppressed, suddenly blurred her vision. "He's gone," she managed, her voice cracking. Yates ascended the steps slowly, as if approaching a skittish colt. "I'm sorry," he said simply. The sincerity in his voice, devoid of the false sympathy so many others had offered, touched something deep within Bethany. Without warning, a sob escaped her, then another, until she was crying in earnest not for the father who had died today, but for the years of fear the childhood lost, the mother taken too soon, and the confusion that now clouded her path forward. Hesitantly, Yates reached out, his hand hovering near her shoulder. "May I?" Through her tears, Bethany nodded, and he gently drew her into an embrace. His arms encircled her without restraint, offering support without demand. For the first time in years, Bethany allowed herself to lean on someone else, if only for a moment. "What will you do now?" he asked quietly when her tears had subsided. It was the question that had been circling in her mind since her father's last words. The ranch was hers, but did she want it? Could she manage it alone? Or should she sell it and pursue her original plan of starting fresh in Denver? "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything's changed so quickly." Yates nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You don't have to decide tonight or tomorrow." "No," she agreed. "But I do need to go home, make arrangements." "I'll take you," he offered. "My horse is outside." The thought of returning to the empty ranch alone was suddenly daunting. Bethany found herself nodding gratefully. As they rode through the darkening landscape, Bethany seated behind Yates on his gray gelding, she was acutely aware of the warmth of his back against her chest, the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them, and the strange sense that despite the day's tragedy, she was moving not into darkness but toward an uncertain dawn. The next few days passed in a blur of necessary activities. There were funeral arrangements to make, paperwork to file transferring the ranch to Bethany's name, and the endless stream of neighbors and townspeople coming to pay their respects. Throughout it all, Yates remained nearby, not intrusive but steadfastly present. He helped with practical matters, mending a broken fence, ensuring the horses were properly tended, even arranging for the cattle buyer who had survived the accident to purchase several head of Jeremiah's stock, providing Bethany with immediate funds. The funeral itself was a small affair. Despite his years in La Junta, Jeremiah Blackwell had few real friends, having alienated most with his drinking and temper. Those who attended seemed to come more for Bethany's sake than out of genuine grief for the deceased. As the modest wooden coffin was lowered into the ground beside her mother's grave, Bethany stood dry-eyed, a complex mix of emotions churning beneath her composed exterior. Relief, guilt, anger, and an unexpected thread of sadness wove together into a tapestry she couldn't fully unravel. "Dust to dust," the Reverend intoned. "May the Lord have mercy on his soul." Bethany's thoughts drifted to her father's final words, not quite an apology, not fully a confession, but an acknowledgement of his failings. It wasn't enough to erase years of pain, but it was something a crack in the wall of bitterness she had built around her heart. After the service, as the small gathering dispersed, Yates approached with his hat in his hands. "Miss Blackwell," he began, his voice soft but firm. "I've been thinking about your situation." Bethany tensed slightly. Over the past days, she had come to appreciate his help and even his company, but the thought of being anyone's situation to solve made her wary. "I'm managing, Mr. Xavier," she said, perhaps more stiffly than she intended. He nodded, undeterred. "I've no doubt of that, but I wanted to make you an offer strictly business." This caught her attention. "What kind of offer?" "I'm still interested in your father's horses, 3 of them as we discussed, but I'd like to propose something more substantial." Yates hesitated, then continued. "I need a partner in my breeding operation, someone with knowledge of bloodlines and horse care, someone I can trust." Bethany stared at him, trying to process his words. "You're offering me a job, a partnership," he corrected. "You'd bring your expertise and 3 of your best horses to North Star Ranch. In return, you'd receive 30% of the profits from our breeding program, plus room and board." The offer was unexpected and, on the surface, generous. But Bethany had learned to look for the hidden costs in any deal, especially one offered by a man. "And what exactly would this partnership entail?" she asked carefully, understanding flashed in Yates's eyes. "Business only, Miss Blackwell. You'd have your own cabin on the property. My ranch hands can vouch for my character, as can several business associates in Denver." He paused. "I understand your caution. I wouldn't expect trust without earning it." Bethany considered his words. The ranch was now hers, but managing it alone would be nearly impossible. She could sell it, but property values were depressed, and she might not get a fair price. Yates's offer provided a third option, a chance to use her knowledge of horses while determining her longer-term path. "I need time to consider," she said finally. "Of course." He handed her a folded document. "The details of my offer in writing. Take all the time you need." As he walked away, Bethany unfolded the paper. The terms were exactly as he'd stated: clear, fair, and with a clause explicitly stating that either party could terminate the agreement with 30 days' notice. That evening, alone in the ranch house that no longer felt like a prison but didn't quite feel like home either, Bethany weighed her options. The thought of leaving La Junta still appealed to her. Too many memories haunted this place, both bitter and sweet. But Yates's offer provided structure and security that striking out alone lacked. Could she trust him? His actions over the past days suggested a decent, honorable man. The way he moved, careful not to startle her, always telegraphing his intentions, spoke of someone who understood her wariness. And there was something in his eyes, a kind of steady calm that resonated with a part of Bethany long buried beneath fear and survival. By morning, she had made her decision. After breakfast, she rode into town to the Colorado House Hotel. Yates was in the dining room, nursing a cup of coffee while reviewing what appeared to be ledgers. "Mr. Xavier," she said, approaching his table. "Might I join you?" He stood immediately, pulling out a chair. "Please." Once seated, Bethany got straight to the point. "I've considered your offer. I'm prepared to accept with one condition." "Name it," he replied, setting aside his papers. "I want to sell the ranch before we leave. I don't want to keep any ties to La Junta." The words came out more firmly than she'd expected, surprising even herself with their conviction. Yates studied her face, then nodded. "I can help arrange that. I know a cattle rancher in Pueblo who's been looking to expand. He might give you a fair price." "Thank you." Bethany hesitated, then extended her hand across the table. "Partners, then." His hand engulfed hers, warm and calloused from work, his grip firm but not crushing. Partners. The following 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The ranch sold more quickly than Bethany had anticipated, though for less than its value in better days. Still, combined with her savings and what she received for several head of cattle, she had a respectable sum to begin her new life. She selected 3 horses to bring the bay gelding Yates had admired, a promising young mare, and after some deliberation, Thunder, the black stallion her father had prized. The rest were sold along with the property. As for personal possessions, Bethany took little her mother's portrait, a few clothes, and a small wooden box containing her mother's wedding ring and a lock of her hair. The rest she either sold or gave away, eager to shed the physical remnants of her past life. The day of departure dawned clear and cool, with a hint of summer in the air. Bethany stood on the porch of the ranch house one last time, surveying the property that had been her world for 22 years. "Ready?" Yates asked, leading the horses to the front of the house. Bethany took a deep breath, then nodded. Yes, they would travel by horseback, leading the extra animals. Denver was 3 days' ride and North Star Ranch another day beyond that. It would be a journey unlike any Bethany had taken before, physically demanding but also symbolic, a passage from one life to another. As they rode away from the ranch, Bethany resisted the urge to look back. Whatever lay ahead, partnership, independence, perhaps even friendship, it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. The journey north proved both challenging and unexpectedly liberating. Traveling with Yates, Bethany discovered a different rhythm to life than the tense vigilance that had defined her years under her father's roof. Their days took on a pleasant pattern, rising at dawn, riding until mid-afternoon, then making camp while there was still plenty of daylight. Yates proved to be good company, respectful of her personal space, willing to share the camp duties equally, and possessed of a quiet humor that occasionally drew reluctant smiles from Bethany. In the evenings, as they sat by the fire, he told her about North Star Ranch, the 20 acres of good grazing land, the small but growing herd of horses, the 3 ranch hands who helped with the day-to-day operations. "It's not much compared to some spreads," he admitted on their second night out. "But it's mine, free and clear." "How did you come by it?" Bethany asked, curious about the man who had so unexpectedly altered her path. Yates poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "Worked as a ranch hand from the time I was 16, saved every penny. When I was 25, I heard about a widow selling her place cheap. Her husband had died, and she wanted to move east to be with her daughter." He smiled slightly. "The house was falling apart, the fences were down, and there wasn't a decent horse on the property. But the land was good and the price was right. And your family?" The question slipped out before Bethany could reconsider it, his expression sobered. "My father died when I was young. My mother raised me and my sister alone until I was 15, then my father's brother came to live with us." A shadow passed over his face. He wasn't a kind man. The simple statement contained volumes of unspoken pain, and Bethany found herself nodding in silent understanding. "My sister married young to escape him," Yates continued. "My mother didn't have that option. By the time I was earning enough to help her leave, it was too late." He looked directly at Bethany, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "That's why I couldn't just ride away when I saw your bruises." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Bethany felt a connection forming, not romantic, not yet, but a bridge of shared experience that spanned the careful distance she'd maintained. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing, for stopping." Yates nodded, and they lapsed into a comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts as the fire burned low. By the 3rd day of travel, they had reached the outskirts of Denver. The city had grown significantly since Bethany's only previous visit as a child, with new buildings stretching in all directions and the constant bustle of people and vehicles filling the streets. "We'll stay at a hotel tonight," Yates decided as they approached. "Give the horses a proper rest before the final leg tomorrow." Denver's Brown Palace Hotel was grander than any building Bethany had ever entered. The ornate lobby with its polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers made her acutely conscious of her travel-worn appearance and simple clothes. Yates, however, moved with easy confidence, securing separate but adjoining rooms and arranging for their horses to be well tended at a nearby livery. "It's too fancy," Bethany protested quietly as they ascended in the elevator, another first for her. "We've earned a little comfort," Yates replied with a smile. "And I have business contacts to meet in the morning. First impressions matter in this city." Bethany's room was a revelation, spacious and elegantly furnished, with a large bed covered in crisp white linens and a private bathroom featuring hot, running water. After days on the trail, the prospect of a proper bath was nearly overwhelming. Later, freshly bathed and dressed in her one good dress, a deep blue cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, Bethany joined Yates for dinner in the hotel's restaurant. The menu offered more choices than she'd ever seen, and the array of silverware was daunting. "Start from the outside and work your way in," Yates murmured, noting her hesitation with the utensils. His guidance, offered without condescension, helped Bethany navigate the unfamiliar social waters. Throughout the meal, she observed how Yates interacted with the waitstaff, courteous but not obsequious, commanding respect without demanding it. "How did you learn all this?" she asked as they enjoyed coffee after their meal. "The manners, the business sense." Yates considered the question. "Books, mostly, and watching men who were successful but decent. I decided early on that I wanted to be more than just another cowboy." He smiled slightly. "Though at heart, that's still what I am." The following morning, while Yates met with his business associates, Bethany explored the shops near the hotel. With some of her money from the ranch sale, she purchased several practical items for her new life: sturdy work clothes, a pair of properly fitted boots, and a warm coat for the Colorado winters. She also, after much deliberation, selected a simple but elegant green dress. It had been years since she'd bought anything purely because it gave her pleasure, and the act felt like another small step toward reclaiming herself. By midday, they were on the trail again, heading north toward Clear Creek and North Star Ranch. The terrain gradually changed, becoming more rugged and wooded as they left the plains surrounding Denver. "We'll be there before sunset," Yates promised as they paused to water the horses at a small stream, just over that ridge. As they crested the hill in the golden light of late afternoon, Bethany got her first glimpse of what would be her new home. The ranch was nestled in a small valley, with mountains rising in the distance. A modest two-story house stood near a cluster of outbuildings, with corrals and pastures spreading beyond. It wasn't large by ranching standards, but it had a well-cared-for appearance that spoke of pride and hard work. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. Yates smiled, genuine pleasure lighting his features. "Wait until you see it in the morning light." As they approached, 3 men emerged from the barn to greet them. The eldest, a weathered cowboy who Yates introduced as Tom Withers, the ranch foreman, tipped his hat respectfully to Bethany. "Miss Blackwell," he said, "Mr. Xavier told us you'd be joining the operation. Welcome to North Star." The other 2, Matt Carson, a broad-shouldered young man with an easy smile, and Daniel Ortiz, whose quiet competence was evident in how he immediately moved to care for the tired horses, were equally welcoming, showing none of the skepticism Bethany had feared might greet a woman entering their domain. "I've had your cabin prepared," Yates told her, leading the way to a small but sturdy structure set apart from the main house. "It's not fancy, but it's comfortable. Used to be the previous owner's mother-in-law's place." Inside, Bethany found a simple but pleasant living space: one main room with a small kitchen area, a bedroom, and a tiny washroom. Everything was clean and in good repair, with curtains at the windows and a colorful quilt on the bed. "It's perfect," she said, surprised to find she meant it. After the tension-filled rooms of her father's house, this modest cabin felt like a sanctuary. "Get settled in," Yates suggested. "Rest. We'll start tomorrow with a proper tour of the place." Alone in her new home, Bethany unpacked her few possessions, placing her mother's portrait on the small bedside table. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she ran her hand over the smooth quilt, trying to absorb the reality of where she was and how drastically her life had changed in just a few short weeks. The fear and uncertainty that had been her constant companions for so long hadn't disappeared completely. But they had receded, making room for something she recognized, with cautious wonder, as hope. The first weeks at North Star Ranch passed in a whirlwind of activity as Bethany settled into her new role. True to his word, Yates treated her as a partner, seeking her input on the horses and respecting her expertise. The three hands, initially curious about the arrangement, quickly came to appreciate Bethany's quiet competence and knowledge. Spring gave way to summer, bringing long days of work training horses, maintaining the property, and implementing the breeding program that Yates and Bethany had carefully planned. Thunder, her father's prized stallion, proved to be even more valuable than they'd hoped, his offspring showing excellent conformation and temperament. Throughout these busy days, Bethany found herself gradually healing. The physical bruises her father had inflicted faded quickly, but the deeper wounds, the wariness, the expectation of pain, the habit of making herself small took longer to mend. Yet mend they did, in the safety of her cabin, in the satisfaction of work well done, and in the simple pleasure of moving through the world unafraid. Yates remained a steady presence respectful of her boundaries, patient with her occasional retreats into silence, and unfailingly kind. Their partnership flourished on a foundation of mutual respect, their shared passion for horses providing common ground as they navigated the delicate balance of their relationship. By midsummer, Bethany had established a comfortable routine. Mornings were devoted to horse training, afternoons to whatever tasks needed attention around the ranch, and evenings to quiet pursuits in her cabin, reading, sewing, or sometimes simply sitting on her small porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. It was on such an evening in late July that Yates approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Mind some company," he called from a respectful distance. "Please," Bethany replied, gesturing to the second chair on her porch. He handed her a steaming cup and settled into the chair beside her. For a time, they sat in companionable silence, watching as the day's last light faded from the sky. "The bay mare's foal is doing well," Bethany observed. "Strong legs, good lungs. Your breeding plan is working better than I hoped," Yates acknowledged. "We've had interest from 3 buyers already, based on Thunder's reputation alone." Bethany smiled, feeling a flush of pride. The breeding program had been largely her design, drawing on everything she'd learned from her mother and her own observations over the years. "There's a horse auction in Boulder next month," Yates continued. "I was thinking we should attend, maybe look for another mare or 2. "That makes sense," she agreed. "We could use more diversity in the bloodlines." Another comfortable silence fell between them. Bethany was struck by how easy it had become to be in Yates's presence. The tension that had marked their early interactions had gradually dissolved, replaced by a warm camaraderie that sometimes, in moments like this, hinted at the possibility of something more. "Bethany," Yates said after a time, using her first name as he'd taken to doing in private, "I've been meaning to ask you something." Something in his tone made her heart quicken. "Yes, the ranch has been doing well, better than ever with your input." He set his coffee cup aside, turning slightly to face her. "I was wondering if you'd consider a more permanent arrangement." Bethany's breath caught. "What kind of arrangement?" Yates met her eyes directly, his expression open and earnest. "I care for you, more than as a business partner. More than as a friend, even." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I'm not proposing marriage, not yet. That would be presumptuous, given everything you've been through, but I wanted you to know my feelings and my intentions." The honesty of his declaration, free from pressure or expectation, touched Bethany deeply. In the months they'd spent working side by side, she had come to admire Yates, his integrity, his quiet strength, the gentleness of his hands whether calming a nervous colt or passing her a tool. And yes, there had been moments when their eyes met across a corral or their hands brushed while working that had stirred something she'd almost forgotten she could feel. "I care for you too," she admitted softly, "but I'm still healing," he finished for her. "I know and I respect that." He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "I'm a patient man, Bethany Blackwell. I've built this ranch one day at a time, and I'm willing to build whatever might grow between us the same way, slowly, carefully, making sure the foundation is solid. Relief and gratitude washed over her. "Thank you for understanding. May I call on you properly? Take you to dinner in town sometimes, or for rides that aren't just about checking fences?" His question was light, but his eyes were serious. Bethany smiled, feeling a flutter of excitement beneath her caution. "I'd like that." The courtship that followed was unlike anything Bethany had ever imagined for herself. Yates was true to his word, proceeding with a patience that respected her past while gently encouraging her to envision a different future. Their first official outing was a simple dinner at the best restaurant in the nearest town, followed by a walk under the stars. Yates offered his arm but didn't press when Bethany hesitated before taking it. When he returned her to her cabin, he bid her goodnight with a tip of his hat and a warm smile, making no move to kiss her or enter her space. As summer turned to fall, their outings became a regular part of life at North Star. They attended the horse auction in Boulder, where their professional partnership and growing personal connection worked in harmonious tandem. They visited Denver for a theatrical performance, Bethany wearing her green dress and feeling, for the first time, like a woman being courted rather than a possession being claimed. Through it all, Yates remained attentive without being demanding, affectionate without being presumptuous. His hands, which Bethany had first noticed for their gentleness with horses, became a source of fascination for her, strong enough to break a wild Mustang, but controlled enough to barely skim her waist when helping her down from a wagon. It was those hands that finally broke through the last of her defenses. One crisp October afternoon, as they worked together to repair a section of fence, Bethany watched Yates's hands skillfully manipulating the wire and tools. Without warning, a memory surfaced: her father's hands, clenched into fists, descending with unrestrained fury. The contrast was so stark, so complete, that Bethany found herself frozen, staring at Yates's hands as if seeing them for the first time. "Bethany." Yates's voice broke through her reverie. "Are you all right? Your hands," she said, the words escaping before she could consider them. "They're so different." Understanding dawned in his eyes. Setting down his tools, he held his hands out, palms up, in a gesture that was both an offering and a promise. "These hands will never hurt you," he said quietly. "Never." Something shifted within Bethany in that moment, a loosening of fear, a softening of resistance. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hands in his. The contact sent a warmth spreading up her arms and through her body, a sensation so far removed from fear that it took her a moment to recognize it as desire. "Yates," she whispered, her voice unsteady. He stepped closer, his eyes asking a question. In answer, Bethany lifted her face to his. Their first kiss was gentle, almost reverent, a meeting of equals, each giving and receiving in perfect balance. When they parted, Bethany found herself trembling, not with fear but with the intensity of emotions long suppressed. Yates's arms encircled her, offering support without confinement. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she confessed against his chest. His hand came up to stroke her hair, the touch both soothing and electrifying. "I fell for you the moment I saw you standing up to that sheriff in La Junta," he admitted. "So brave, even when you were afraid." That night, sitting before the fire in the main house, they talked for hours about their pasts, their hopes, the future they might build together. Bethany shared more details of her life with her father than she had ever revealed, finding that each disclosure loosened the grip of those memories on her present. Yates listened without judgment, occasionally sharing his own experiences with his abusive uncle. Their shared understanding created a bond that went beyond romance, a recognition of survival, of overcoming, of refusing to be defined by the pain inflicted by others. As winter settled over North Star Ranch, bringing snow to the mountains and quiet days of indoor work, Bethany and Yates's relationship deepened. They spent evenings reading aloud to each other, planning the spring breeding schedule, or simply enjoying the comfortable silence that comes with true compatibility. Christmas approached, bringing with it preparations for a small celebration. The ranch hands would join them for dinner before departing to visit their own families, leaving Bethany and Yates alone for the holiday itself. On Christmas Eve, after the others had gone, Yates led Bethany to the main house, which he had decorated with evergreen boughs and candles. A small tree stood in the corner, adorned with simple ornaments and topped with a silver star. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in red paper. Bethany unwrapped it carefully to reveal a wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of horses running across the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a silver ring set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," Yates explained softly, "given to her by my father before he died." Bethany looked up at him, her heart racing. "Yates, I'm asking properly now," he said, taking her hand. "Bethany Blackwell, will you marry me? Not because you need protection or because I need a partner for the ranch, but because I love you and want to build a life with you." Tears filled Bethany's eyes, not tears of fear or pain, as had been so common in her past, but tears of joy and wonder. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." As Yates slipped the ring onto her finger, Bethany marveled at the journey that had brought her here from a frightened girl under her father's brutal control to a woman choosing her own path, her own partner, her own happiness. They were married in the spring, when the land was coming alive with new growth. The ceremony was small but joyful, held in the meadow behind the main house with the mountains as their witness. Bethany wore a simple white dress, her mother's portrait in a locket around her neck. Yates stood tall and proud, his eyes never leaving hers as they spoke their vows. Their life together unfolded like the seasons, beautiful in its simplicity, rich in its depth. The ranch prospered under their joint care, their breeding program gaining recognition throughout Colorado and beyond. They added to their property, built a new barn, and eventually hired 2 more hands to help with the expanding operation. In their 3rd year of marriage, Bethany gave birth to a son, whom they named Edward after Yates's father. 2 years later, a daughter joined their family, Alina, for Bethany's mother. The children grew strong and happy, surrounded by horses and open skies, their lives untouched by the shadows that had darkened their parents' childhoods. On summer evenings, the family would often gather on the porch after dinner. While the children played in the yard, Bethany and Yates would sit side by side, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, watching the sunset paint the sky. "Are you happy?" Yates would sometimes ask, his voice low and intimate, and Bethany, looking out over the ranch that was their creation, feeling the solid strength of his arm around her and the love that had healed what once seemed beyond repair, would answer truthfully, completely. Years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. The children grew, developed their own personalities and passions, Edward inheriting his father's quiet confidence and his mother's eye for good horseflesh, Alina showing a spirit of adventure and a gift for training even the most difficult animals. North Star Ranch became known throughout the territory for its exceptional quarter horses, with buyers coming from as far as Texas and California. The Xavier brand was synonymous with quality and integrity, a legacy Bethany and Yates built together, day by day. They had their disagreements, of course, moments of tension and occasional hurt feelings. But they had learned the value of honest communication, of working through problems rather than allowing them to fester. And Yates, true to his promise, never raised a hand in anger, not to Bethany, not to their children, not even to their animals. On their 20th anniversary, as they sat together on the porch of the main house, now expanded and improved over the years, Bethany took Yates's hand in hers, tracing the lines and calluses that had become as familiar to her as her own. "I've been thinking about my father," she said quietly. Yates squeezed her hand gently. "What about him? For so long, I defined myself by what he did to me, first as his victim, then as a survivor." She looked out over their property, where Edward was teaching his young son to ride and Alina was brushing down a new foal. "But that's not who I am anymore. It's not all I am." "No," Yates agreed. "You're so much more." Bethany smiled, feeling the truth of his words. "His fists broke me once. But your hands," she lifted his palm to her lips, pressing a kiss to the weathered skin, "your hands helped me rebuild. Not into what I was before, but into something stronger, something better." Yates's eyes, still as blue as the day they'd met though now framed by lines of age and laughter, held hers with unwavering devotion. "You rebuilt yourself, Bethany. I just had the privilege of watching, of holding space for you to become who you were always meant to be." As the sun set over North Star Ranch, casting long shadows across the land they had nurtured together, Bethany Xavier knew with absolute certainty that the journey from broken girl to whole woman, from fear to love, from survival to triumph, had been worth every step. Her father's fists had once defined her world, constraining it to a narrow existence of pain and caution. But Yates's hands had opened doors, built fences only to protect, not to imprison, and most importantly, had always been there to hold hers when she needed support and to let go when she needed freedom. In that balance, that perfect harmony of strength and gentleness, of partnership and independence, Bethany had found not just healing but joy, not just safety but adventure, not just a haven but a home. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, she knew with quiet certainty that this love, this family, this life they had created together, was what she had been moving toward all along, even in her darkest moments. It was, in every sense, enough. It was, in the truest sense, everything.